My name is Lona Ho'ala. I'm a biochemist. I'm the owner of LivingWaters Engineered Water Treatment Solutions. And I'd like to share with you today what is one of the most exciting developments in water treatment products available today. Water is life. It's the lifeblood of our world. 70% of the surface of our planet is covered with water. Interestingly, our bodies are 70% water and contain the same saline concentration as ocean water. The oceans, like our hearts, send water into the atmosphere, which is our Earth's lungs, and it's purified there and returned to the land to bring life. Less than 2% of the water on Earth is fresh water, and of that, 90% is locked up in glaciers and icebergs. That means only 1 out of 5 gallons of fresh water is available for our use, and that part is becoming increasingly scarce and polluted. There is no new water on Earth. We're drinking the same water dinosaurs drank 100 million years ago. Now, if you think your tap water is safe, you may be making a very big mistake. And I know from working with thousands of people over the last 30 years in my career, it's very easy for people to take the safety of their water supply for granted. Is that a smart idea? Do you really know what can be in your water? One thing you can be sure of: your health and the health of your loved ones depends on the answer to that question. After spending the better part of my life working with water, and that's now about 50 years of my career, I can tell you that it's not wise to take the quality of your drinking water for granted. And there's at least 5 reasons why this is true. Number 1, there's been an exponential growth in the demand for water, and it's far outstripped our ability to find suitable new supplies. Number 2, existing supplies are becoming increasingly polluted. Number 3, across the country, water treatment plants and delivery infrastructure are so old that it's impossible to guarantee safe water at your tap. Number 4, new research shows how many common water contaminants, including chemicals added to the water during the treatment process, are far more dangerous to human health than previously believed. And number 5, political struggles keep getting in the way of effective solutions. And these involve not only environmental issues, but governmental entities that want us to believe that they can do more for us than they actually can. And this is a problem throughout our government altogether, and that is that the idea that the government can protect you and keep you safe. If you believe that, you're in for big trouble. Here are the facts. This is a picture of a cover of an August 12, 2002 U.S. News and World Report, and it published an in-depth investigation into the nation's water supply. The disturbing point made by that article is that Americans can expect their water supply to become increasingly costly, dirty, and scarce. It's been more than 16 years since this report appeared. 16 years, and since that time, the nation's water problems have become much worse than even this magazine talked about. We talked about these. Let's go into it in more detail. Problem number 1, outdated water treatment facilities. Most water treatment plants are from 50 to 150 years old. They were built only to do 2 things. Number 1, to disinfect water so that they could prevent outbreaks of waterborne diseases like typhoid and cholera. And number 2, to clarify the water to make it palatable to drink. Most water treatment plants are neither designed nor able to remove contaminants like lead, industrial metals like mercury and chromium, arsenic, herbicides and pesticides, fuels and solvents, industrial wastes, and pharmaceutical and personal care product residues that are increasingly finding their way into our water supply. Number 2, inadequate regulations. Now, there's something like 45,000 contaminants that have found in our water supplies across the country. Of those, there's 260 contaminants that have caught the attention of a lot of people, scientists, and they're regularly found in our nation's tap water. That's why they're of concern. And of those 260, 141, more than half, have no safety standards whatsoever. 52 of these are linked to cancer, 41 are to reproductive toxicity, 36 to developmental toxicity, and 16 to immune system damage. Now, despite the potential health risks, any concentration of these chemicals in tap water is legal, no matter how high.
People assume that there's somebody in the government protecting their water supply, and that's often not the case. One of the most extraordinary examples of that is the most common pesticide sprayed in the United States, atrazine.
Atrazine itself is an herbicide, or a weed killer, and it's used on products such as corn. It is the #1 contaminant found in drinking water, and groundwater, and surface water. Initially, we were contracted by Syngenta, the makers of atrazine, and their interest was in trying to understand whether or not, so they said, whether or not atrazine could function as an endocrine disruptor, meaning could it interfere with hormones such as thyroid hormone, testosterone, estrogen. We found that atrazine had a number of effects, but most significantly, atrazine demasculized the exposed male frogs. I would even say chemically castrated. We went on to show that in addition to being demasculized, they were also feminized. So in other words, male amphibians would grow ovaries and even produce eggs. Fish show similar effects. Their sperm counts drop and they start to make egg yolk protein. Does that mean that atrazine is causing a global decline in sperm counts in men? Again, the experimental and the epidemiological data suggest that atrazine may play a very significant role. It's also associated with prostate cancer and some of the factories that produce atrazine, as well as with breast cancer and some studies that look at women whose water is contaminated with atrazine. One big concern might be fetuses that, in effect, are living in water. So if that fetus gets exposed to a chemical, it's constantly drinking its amniotic fluid. In the entire European Union, atrazine has been banned. And in effect, that is the only way you can limit atrazine levels because it can travel up to 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers in the rainwater. In fact, of the 80 million pounds of atrazine we use in the United States, about 500,000 pounds of that atrazine comes back in the rainwater. And the irony is, I guess, that here's a European company selling 80 million pounds of a product in the United States where it's not even legal in the home country.
When the Environmental Protection Agency under the Bush administration decided that it needed to at least appear to do something about the problem after we sued them, they ended up sitting down with the people that made atrazine in private negotiations. They met over 50 times privately with the company, and they cut a deal. No crackdown, no enforcement action, no banning the pesticide.
Now, in addition to atrazine, which is a serious problem, as you can see, glyphosate is the next issue. It's an herbicide sponsored by Monsanto. It is now known to be an extremely potent carcinogen. And most importantly, we have since, in just the last few years, we've discovered that your body contains hundreds of species of microorganisms, 10 times as many microorganisms as there are cells in your body that carry your DNA. And altogether, these things are called the microbiome. and we now know that they are critical to human health. Recent research confirms that glyphosate destroys this balance inside of the human body. It's a key to human life. What the disruption is causing is all kinds of widespread health disorders. But in spite of all the research, the EPA has declared atrazine and glyphosate are harmless to human health. To do otherwise would cost the agricultural industry billions of dollars. And I want you to know that our water treatment systems, I'm sensitive to this, and I use a very expensive media called catalytic activated carbon, and it's the only thing that can effectively remove dangerous chemicals like atrazine and glyphosate, perchlorate, chloramine, MTBE, and it's also the only thing out there that can effectively remove pharmaceutical and personal care product residues increasingly found in water supplies. Most water treatment systems won't use it because they know people are ignorant about this subject and they want to keep the price of their product as cheap as possible. Now, problem number 3, deteriorating infrastructure. With the exception of the many water mains made out of lead, the majority of water mains have reached the end of their useful life and they're starting to fail at a rapidly increasing rate. In some places, the frequency of water main breaks is increasing at the rate of 300% per year. Every time a water main leaks or breaks, it leaves the people it is serving vulnerable to consuming dangerous microorganisms. Now, the EPA estimates the cost to repair this infrastructure will exceed, well, it's between $500 billion and $1 trillion. The money isn't there. Most of the time, pipes don't just suddenly burst. Instead, they tend to leak for a considerable time before they break. Water mains are typically buried in proximity and often just below sewer lines, which are even more subject to leaks. That's because sewer lines don't freeze as easily as water lines. Right of ways, they got to run in the same place, so they put the water line below the sewer line. Now, as water flows through a water line, it creates a vacuum, and it sucks in dangerous bacteria and toxins that are in their proximity. So when water mains are leaking, bacteria, pharmaceuticals, and anything that people flush down their toilets can leak out of their sewers and into the water mains that bring your drinking water to you. They make new leak detectors now that they mount to water treatment mains that run through a city. And these things monitor sounds, and they typically operate during the night when traffic is light. And these new devices that hear these water main leaks are showing that leaks are a much bigger problem that people recognize. That map to the left, it shows a 150-block neighborhood in LaSalle, Illinois. It's a typical U.S. city. And the points show where these water main leak detectors are installed. There are 12 points in red where leaks, overt leaks, are being detected. There are 13 points in yellow where leaks are likely. That means there can be as many as 6 water main leaks for every 10 square blocks, and each one is a potential source of microbiological contamination. And that's why I've designed our systems with safe water technology for years, and they are capable of providing guaranteed protection, P231 independently certified, that they will protect against cysts, bacteria, molds, and spores, and even viruses. Disinfectants. To combat the danger of water main leaks, municipal water treatment plants must put enough disinfectant in the water to kill pathogenic organisms throughout the delivery system, not just at the treatment plant, but in all those water lines that may be leaking. Now, chlorine used to be the most commonly used disinfectant, but chlorine tends to dissipate from water, so they have to put a lot of it in at the beginning at the water treatment plant so that there's still enough at the end of the line to make the water be disinfected. Besides bacteria, chlorine oxidizes dissolved organic matter in the water. Where does that come from? Well, if it's a surface water source, it's picking up animal droppings, leaves, fish poop, decomposed organisms of all kinds. Those are called organic. And when these things decompose in water, they create a class of compounds called dissolved organic contaminants. And when those things are hit with chlorine, they create a class of compounds called disinfectant byproducts. We now know that these disinfectant byproducts are potent carcinogens and they cause birth defects. Chlorine has other problems. Chlorine in showers damages lung tissue. In young children, breathing chlorine can lead to a 40% increased chance of developing asthma. Chlorine breathed in showers is absorbed directly into the blood. Once there, it damages arteries and oxidizes the lipids or fats in the blood. And some people claim that that may be the primary cause of heart disease. Think about it. Chlorine goes right through your lungs in a shower, right into the blood, and it oxidizes fats. And what do we find that is occluding arteries? Oxidized fat. That's why some people, many good researchers, believe that chlorinated drinking water is a primary cause of heart disease because it's breathed in a shower. It also reacts with stomach contents to create chemicals known to cause stomach cancers. Now, our systems effectively remove chlorine from water used in drinking water systems and showers, but that's an easy thing to do. Almost every water treatment product out there that contains some kind of carbon or potentially a media called KDF, stands for kinetic degradation fluxation, but it's a common water treatment media now. Those are extremely effective at removing chlorine. It's a problem where it exists, it's easy to get rid of. For years, municipal water treatment suppliers assured customers that the disinfectants to water supplies were perfectly safe, and a lot of money was spent to convince the public that these chemicals pose no risk to human health. And it's not true. And the reason I put this in here is that the government constantly is telling us that things are safe, and they're not safe. So it's called personal responsibility. Rely on the government, you're in trouble. Disinfection byproducts are formed when chlorine reacts with dissolved organic matter, and those dissolved organic contaminants can either be completely removed, or here's another way to deal with the problem. Why don't we add ammonia to the chlorine so that we can create another kind of disinfectant called combined chlorine or chloramine? And that, because it's so cheap, is what water treatment plants decided to do. When they couldn't comply with EPA requirements for the number of disinfection byproducts in water, they started chloraminating. Another benefit for them is that it doesn't evaporate from water, so less is needed to reach the end of the line. And it makes it much cheaper to use chloramine than it does chlorine. But we now know that chloramine is also very harmful to human health. Chloramine is irritating to the skin and the gastrointestinal system. It has its own set of disinfection byproducts, including some that are among the most toxic ever discovered in drinking water. Like nitrates, chloramine can combine with the hemoglobin of the blood to prevent it from carrying oxygen. That's a big deal for elderly people. Perhaps the biggest danger is that chloramine survives its trip through the stomach and enters the gut, where it destroys the microbiome. Remember what we said about that just a few minutes ago. Now, it's not removed by conventional filters, and this is a big deal. That includes those that use granular or powdered activated carbon, carbon blocks with lead adsorbent resins, KDF redox media, Even reverse osmosis membranes and distillers allow chloramine through because it's a very light molecule. It gets concentrated in the product water made by those kinds of water filtration devices. And of course, ionizers do absolutely nothing to deal with chloramine. Our systems are designed with catalytic activated carbon. That's what I talked about regarding some of these really difficult chemicals. They can effectively reduce chloramine. One of the things I want to say here that's important is there are many systems out there that will claim that they reduce chloramine and they do not have catalytic carbon in them. That is false advertising. It may be true, if we consider 100% of whatever's in the water is chloramine, is 100%, then if it reduces it by 5%, they can say that it reduced the chloramine. But I don't think most people, when they buy a filter to protect them against chloramine, are thinking in terms of a 5% reduction. If you're like most people, if you're like me, I want to see a 95, 98, 99% reduction. And that's what catalytic carbon can do. You can reduce chloramine using plain carbon, but not to any significant degree. It maybe passes legal requirements saying that it reduces it, because in fact it does, but it doesn't pass the smell test for doing what you expect a water filter to actually do. And then metals. Municipalities are completely unable to make your water safe from dangerous metals, and those commonly show up in water supplies. These can include lead, cadmium, mercury, arsenic, excessive levels of copper, and I should add in here chromium. Lead in drinking water is a serious problem because it's so widespread. People don't realize lead water mains were used extensively prior to the 1980s. That's because lead is a soft metal, it doesn't corrode, and if it's buried in ground that has rocks and sharp pieces of gravel that press against it, it's not going to crack and break like steel might. So lead was very popular, and a lot of the water mains in the country are made out of lead. Many homes that were built prior to 1988 leach excessive lead into the water supply because they were built with high lead brass and lead solder in the plumbing. Now, the switch to chloramine has made this problem worse, actually, because it's given rise to a kind of bacteria in the water that are not harmed by it, but actually feed on chloramine. And the byproduct of their metabolism is acidic. And that acid has eroded the lime scale that used to protect water from the lead in water mains and brass valves that deliver the water to your home. And that's the reason why water in Washington, D.C., their schools were recently found to contain lead at 1,500 times the EPA maximum. Didn't used to be a problem. Why all of a sudden? Because the city started to chloraminate. It gave rise to these bacteria. The bacteria feed on the chloramine. They create the acid that erodes the lime scale that was protecting the water from the pipes. With that being gone, now all of this is coming out into the water. It destroys the IQ of young children, lead does. It leads to developmental difficulties, hyperactivity, and it adds to the problem of senile dementia in the elderly. Now, arsenic is a big one. Arsenic is a common water contaminant found throughout the United States and much of the world. The EPA has recently reduced the limit of arsenic in water from 50 parts per billion to 10 parts per billion. Sounds like a big deal, right? Well, at 50 parts per billion, about 1 in 100 people who consistently drink that water will die of a cancer. And besides cancer, many others will develop serious kidney and nervous system disorders. People wind up with ganglion cysts, all kinds of problems. Now, prior to that research, people had been told for years that arsenic at that level in water was absolutely safe. And that was another one of those government pronouncements that turned out not to be true. Now, even at the new limit of 10 parts per billion, 1 in 500 people will die of cancer. Now, that's interesting because the EPA normally accepts a figure of 1 in 10,000 deaths due to some kind of contaminant as being permissible. So we're now talking about 1 in 500 people. That is way, way, way higher in terms of the ratio of people who are going to get cancer from drinking this water than what it would normally accept. Why? Because municipal water treatment providers complain it is just too expensive to remove arsenic from water, and it is. It's very expensive. Now, you may think you're safe if you're a well owner and your water test shows arsenic present at some level less than the EPA limit of 10 parts per billion. That would be a mistaken assumption. The kind of arsenic that comes out of a well is called trivalent arsenic. And these EPA rules were made for pentavalent arsenic, what happens to arsenic after it comes into contact with chlorine. It's oxidized, becomes pentavalent. That's the 10 parts per billion, 1 in 500 people will die of cancer. But the trivalent arsenic, before it gets oxidized, that's the predominant form found in your well water. And it's 10 times as toxic as the pentavalent arsenic, which is the form that's found in municipal water. So the important thing to recognize here is that your tap water can be very harmful to your health. You can be drinking chlorine, fluoride, major problem. And that one is actually sponsored by dentists who tell you to fluoridate your water so you can prevent dental cavities. What a mistake. Bacteria, pesticides, disinfection byproducts, lead, arsenic, perchlorate, fertilizers, discarded potent pharmaceutical drugs, much, much more. Because of a deteriorating infrastructure and inadequate regulations, the risk that your water may be dangerously contaminated goes up every day. Now, here's something to remember. If your water, even if it looks and tastes just fine, bear in mind that many contaminants are tasteless, odorless, and colorless. And there are hundreds of toxic contaminants in our tap water that aren't even monitored. So why so much money and effort to convince the public that their tap water is absolutely safe? Well, like with most things, it comes down to politics. The EPA is a political entity, and it finds itself between a rock and a hard place. The EPA is tasked with stopping the pollution of our nation's waterways and aquifers, and it tries to do a good job. But its attempts are often impaired by the lobbyists in Washington who fight vigorously to prevent that legislation because they say it's too expensive for the industries that they represent. And these industries give millions of dollars a year to both Republicans and Democrats to block reforms. In reality, there's only one political party when it comes down to it. It's called the Republicrats, and they are all paid by the same people. So we get the same results. EPA mandates the costs that EPA mandates cost money that municipal water providers don't have. So they fight the EPA tooth and nail to prevent tighter standards. It took the EPA years to mandate those lower arsenic standards we spoke of a minute ago, because cities like Phoenix and Albuquerque said they couldn't afford them. And because of the cost, even those new standards are, as we've seen, set far too high. If they applied the same standard to arsenic as they do to other chemicals, the cities would go berserk. So if people find out that their drinking water is far more dangerous than they've been led to believe, it would provoke a huge political battle between federal, state, and local governments, industry, municipal water treatment providers, and other people who are involved with drinking water, and that's about everybody. Nobody wants to start that kind of a battle. So here's the equation. You take money, you add politics, and the result is people lose. So don't rely on politics for safe water. If you want to enjoy a reliable supply of clean, healthy, safe drinking water, you have to take personal responsibility. As a teacher of Huna's Way of Wisdom, we talk about this a lot. You've got to take personal responsibility. One of the principles of the system of wisdom I teach, called Huna Wisdom, is that the person with the consequences is the person with the responsibility. Think about that. If it's your consequences, you have the responsibility. And if it's your responsibility, you are the authority. Not the government, not a doctor somewhere. You are the authority. And in order to take care of yourself in this particular case, you have to invest in a quality drinking water system in your own home. Any other approach is a gamble with the health of you and your loved ones at stake. Now, if you own a private water supply or a well, about 15% of you, you don't have some expert regularly checking up on the water's source and its quality before it's sent to your tap. Now, private water supplies are subject to all the same risks as those faced by public suppliers, but the biggest risk is that most well owners don't test their water supplies because proper testing is expensive and it's more convenient to believe that isolation from population centers means safety. You know, if you got a house and it was in Colorado here, before you can sell a house out on a well, you have to have a well test. All they're testing for is a couple of things that may mean immediate danger. But it's not going to pick up arsenic. It's not going to pick up various kinds of chemicals that have leached into your water. They're not designed to do that. It's a cheap little test designed to make sure that if you drink water out of the tap, you're not going to die of some disease like cholera in the next week or month. That's all those are designed to do. They do not test for these kinds of contaminants that mean that your water is dangerous the longer you drink it. Now, an example of that, water supplies in the Intermountain West and around Colorado here were sprayed, trees were sprayed with a chemical called ethylene dibromide. And it was sprayed by the Forest Service to control pine beetle infestations. It's an extremely toxic chemical that's now banned. And my company along the Front Range of Colorado has performed hundreds of water tests. We regularly come across dry cleaning fluid, toxic solvents, gasoline and oil residues, and many other dangerous chemicals, including EDB, ethylene dibromide, in well water supplies, probably because of spraying by the Forest Service or, more commonly, leaking fuel tanks and illegal dumping. If you run a dry cleaners or a paint shop, it's cheap and it's easy to get rid of those chemicals by pouring them out on the ground in some remote area. Why spend the money that it takes to take it to a hazardous waste dump site? They'll just take it out in the hills somewhere, dump it in a ravine, come back home. Once those toxic substances reach the aquifers, they can travel for miles. I mean, 10 and 15 miles away from where they were dumped, and persist in the water for decades. And in some cases, even very small doses are capable of causing a variety of difficult cancers, genetic damage, liver and kidney damage, and birth defects. It's just a fact. Another problem that we have on private water systems are septic systems. They're major sources of contamination of private water supplies. We go through this all the time. You know, I have a restaurant in a little community out west of Woodland Park here, and there had some very unusual chemicals show up in their drinking water, and they got shut down. And when we finally found out, they have a well that is within about 20 yards of their neighbor's septic system. And the neighbor was flushing stuff down the septic system, and that made it into their well water. So in areas where homes on wells and septic systems are located in close proximity to each other, the wells are not only subject to contamination from the property owner's own septic system, but from the neighbor's as well. So if a person disposes of gasoline or motor oil or insecticides or some kind of toxic chemical or any other concentrated waste product down a toilet or a drain, a floor drain in a garage, those chemicals show up in neighborhood wells and persist as problem contaminants for many, many years. There's a little community in Colorado, it's not unlike many little communities, called Crestone. And in the little town of Crestone, the lots are typically 50 by 100 feet. And in those days, they could put a well and a septic tank on every lot. So you have this little community where there's dozens of wells and septic systems all right in the same place. And the wells routinely are contaminated to the point where you can't drink the water that comes out of them, not without treatment. That's just a problem that goes on all over the rural areas of the country. Now, in addition to man-made contaminants, there are other dangerous natural contaminants that are common in well water but very seldom tested for. So, for instance, heavy metals like lead and cadmium and mercury and uranium. They are naturally present in the ground, in ores, and they leach into the water. Other metals like arsenic, iron, excessive levels of manganese. Again, here in Colorado, there's a lot of water that has a lot of iron and manganese in it. Manganese is kind of a slimy black material. It just really messes up your plumbing, but it will do a much worse job on your own nervous system. Zinc, copper, fluoride, naturally occurring fluoride. There's places very close to where we live where fluoride is at 5 and 6 times the level that EPA permits, does serious damage to health, and is naturally present in the well water. Nitrates are a very common problem, especially in agricultural areas, areas where there's a lot of chickens being raised, a lot of pigs being raised, a lot of cattle, and various kinds of crops. And then radioactive elements. Those can all be very common in well water. So when we designed our living water systems, as a naturopath, as a person who wanted the very best thing I could have for my own family, I thought about this. And being a biochemist and being aware of water treatment media, I was able to put together some things that are not commonly available out there. So in thinking about this, here are the things we want to be concerned about. There are 2 kinds of health risks. Immediate risks are microbial infections, getting cholera, typhoid, some kind of parasite, cryptosporidium, giardia. Those kinds of things can make people very, very ill or kill them immediately. The second thing is acute poisoning from toxic chemicals, nitrates, and metals, hexavalent chromium, high levels of manganese, those kinds of things. The long-term risks are probably even more dangerous because it's a chronic exposure to very small doses of all kinds of organic and inorganic contaminants, metals, pharmaceuticals, radioactive substances over long periods of time, and these things cause hormonal problems, liver and kidney disease, birth defects, and a variety of nasty cancers. We know this. So of the 2, the long-term risks are particularly dangerous because by the time you find out you have a health problem due to your water, it is often too late to do anything about it. A child can be born with crippling birth defects, or you may find yourself suffering from a long, painful decline in your health that ends in death. So there are 7 categories of contaminants that can affect your drinking water quality, and you want a system that can deal with these. Number one at the top of the list always is pathogenic microorganisms. Number two are disinfectants. Number three, disinfection byproducts. And by disinfectants, I mean things like chlorine and chloramine, the byproducts of those disinfectants. Organic contaminants, organic molecules, meaning carbon-containing molecules. Inorganic contaminants like fluoride and sulfates and those kinds of things. Radionuclides. And then silt, sand, clay, dirt, turbidity. Why are those things a problem? Well, not only do they make the water nasty to drink, but little tiny particles make really wonderful houses for bacteria because they insulate the bacteria from sunlight and oxygen, and that allows them to proliferate. So here's what you want. There's 8 rules for a water system. I think they're just absolutely common sense, and I hope you can see their importance. Number 1, because microbes are the most dangerous thing in water, you want a water system that can eliminate dangerous pathogens like bacteria, viruses, protozoan cysts, molds, mold spores, and it doesn't allow them to grow in the treated water. One of the problems with carbon used in water treatment systems is that carbon is a perfect house for bacteria. It's dark, it absorbs oxygen so that the oxygen can't kill the bacteria, it protects the bacteria from light. That's one of the reasons why water has to be very, very clean before anybody tries to disinfect it with an ultraviolet light, because any little particles will kind of act like a little shelter for bacteria to go right through in ultraviolet light. So we want something that will eliminate dangerous pathogens. We want to remove, number 2, dangerous heavy metals like lead, cadmium, arsenic, and mercury, and doesn't reintroduce lead or other harmful contaminants back into the treated water. We want a system that will remove chlorine and its carcinogenic disinfection byproducts. And if you live in a city that chloraminates the water, which is about 70% of the cities now, you want a system that can remove it. You want to remove dangerous chemicals like drug residues, hormone disruptors, and the many other toxins penetrating the aquifers from pesticides, fertilizers, landfills, leaking underground fuel tanks, and industrial waste. Very important. And carbon by itself can't do the job. You want a system that's fail-safe and redundant, so that if you're trusting the system to operate, it doesn't dispense unsafe water in the event of some component failure. You want to know that if it's failing. In our system, we have 2 different cartridges devoted to making your water free of bacteria. If one of them should be fail for some reason, the second one does the job. You want a system that works without electricity, so you can ensure yourself and your family a dependable supply of clean, healthy, safe water when you need it the most. Years ago, when Hurricane Isabel came through the East Coast, there was a little community there called Poquoson. And Poquoson is out on a peninsula. The hurricane knocked down all kinds of trees that were laying all over the one road that went in and out of that peninsula. And it knocked out the electricity. So there was drinking water at the tap. There was water, but it was polluted and very dangerous to drink. Couldn't drink it. And there was no electricity. And most people have electric stoves. So they could pour water into a pan, but they had no way to boil it, to disinfect it. So what happened is we had a number of people that had our living water systems in that area. And they couldn't travel down the highway to go get to the nearest FEMA station, Federal Emergency Management Authority. So what they did is they made lines, and they wound up going to neighbors' houses who had our drinking water systems, because it was the only source of clean drinking water for a couple of weeks. Can you imagine how dangerous that would be not to have water in your home that you could drink for a couple of weeks and you can't travel anywhere? There's so many trees and power lines across the road you can't drive anywhere in a car to go get any, and the only sources of water are swamp water around where you live. That's why these systems that don't need electricity to operate are so important. Now, another thing that I think is extremely important is a technology that's incorporated into standard size commercial grade components. So the system's not only reliable, but it'll last for many years. One of the biggest things I get irritated about, I just bought a printer from Xerox, $3,000 printer. They don't make it anymore. I have Xerox concierge program where they're supposed to come out and repair the printer. I am now informed that they can't repair the printer because it's out of production. If I want a printer repaired, I'm going to have to buy a new printer that is in current production. They didn't tell me that when I signed up for the concierge program. So now I have this printer that has 50,000 pages on it, something like that, which is nothing for this printer, and I can't get it repaired. That kind of stuff really bothers me personally. So when I develop these systems, I develop them around standard size components. And we commit to our customers that we will put the latest technology in these standard replacement cartridges, not so they don't have to worry about replacing their entire system every time some new technology comes out. And then finally, you want a system that can be purchased at a price that offers a solid value. And you want it to be easy to install and inexpensive to maintain. So I think all of that stuff is pretty common sense. Now, only our cartridge-based alkalizers can do what I'm about to tell you. There's nothing else out there on the market that can do this. They can do pieces of this, but they can't do it all. First of all, we incorporate a technology used by NASA on the space shuttle and by the Air Force. And it consists of an argonide deal filter and a nanoceram super filter. These are made by Argonide Corporation. A friend of mine named Fred Tepper developed that corporation some years ago and purchased technology from various places around the world, and they came up with these cartridges. They're expensive. Most people won't use them. We do. And together, those technologies, they call it Cool Blue in their system. Our system, we say, is the big brother of the Cool Blue. But because of that technology, they meet NSF standard and Water Quality Association standard P231. That means that they're properly called a water purifier, not just a water filter. And it's the only technology capable of providing guaranteed protection against cysts, bacteria, molds, and spores, and virus. And it produces water at a very usable rate, and it's an uninterrupted flow of that water. So here's a picture of our system. Here's what some of the things that it can do. We're going to get into those here. But it's bacteriologically safe. It works in emergencies because it doesn't need high water pressure or electricity. It's a fail-safe design for things like bacteria. It's therapeutic. It dramatically, even our 6-stage system is a system capable of dramatically increasing the redox potential of the water. That's an important benefit of water. It means every time you drink a glass of water, you're drinking a potent antioxidant and boosting your immune system. And that's because of this media we use called KDF. Other filters, some of them use KDF as well, another very expensive media. Most of them do not use as much as we do in ours. But it's there and it's important. It means that you can dispense the water into bottles and it'll stay fresh and sweet because it won't support the growth of bacteria. It's better quality water. It's better than reverse osmosis because it will remove just as many of the dangerous contaminants as the very best RO systems, but it leaves in the healthy alkaline minerals of calcium, potassium, phosphorus, and magnesium, and those are the things that make water taste really, really good. It's non-toxic parts. Our systems use all premium lead-free parts and plastics that don't leach lead back into the treated water, doesn't leach chemicals back into the treated water. They're capable of removing fluoride. Now, this is something that's very misunderstood. I see cartridges all the time out there, systems that say they can reduce fluoride. And the amount of media that they have in that cartridge is the equivalent of a couple of tablespoons of media. And I want you to know that that might remove fluoride for maybe 50 gallons of water, maybe 100 gallons of water. But the performance is going to drop off dramatically. By the time it's been installed on your water for less than a month, it's not doing any good at all. We use a whole cartridge full of the most advanced fluoride removal media that there is. It will do an excellent job of removing over 95% of the fluoride in your water for the life of the cartridge, which is typically a year. I don't know of anybody else who does that. Chloramine removal. Because of our catalytic carbon, our system can remove chloramine. And for the same reason, it also can remove perchlorate and atrazine and glyphosate and some of these things that are very difficult to remove from water. And many reverse osmosis systems, as I said, in distillation, they not only don't remove chloramine, they actually concentrate it in the product water because the molecule is small enough to make it through an RO membrane or come out of the water in a distillation system. And in the product water of a distillation system. And the bottom line is that this stuff gets concentrated in the product water, and it's not removed by plain carbon. So being able to remove chemicals requires that catalytic carbon. No power or high water pressure is needed. Our systems are environmentally friendly. They're easy to use. They use these long reach style faucets that look very nice on your sink. They're as good as you can find in of any faucet anywhere. So you don't have to hold heavy containers while they fill with water. Set it down in the sink, swivel the thing, turn it on, and it'll fill up the container. Big pots, pitchers, those sorts of things. Till you have a system that can do it, you don't understand how important that might be. Here's another thing. You can't run out of good water. You'll appreciate it if you ever have had an RO system as an example, because you don't want to wash off your lettuce, make soup, boil pasta, wash your vegetables, and then also fill up water glasses for the table. You can't do it. You run out of water. In our system, you do all of those things, and you never can run out of filtered water. It's economical. They're less expensive to buy, install, and maintain than any other system that can produce anything close to that quality of water. Typically, even our most expensive systems that are capable of doing some incredible things with the infusion of hydrogen, they wind up costing less than 10 cents per gallon for filtered water. And they're a superior value. We commit to always put the newest, latest technology in our cartridges. Every time somebody orders new cartridges, they automatically upgrade to the latest technology. I have people that had bought systems from us 15 years ago, and when they rebuy their new cartridges every year, their systems are as good as cartridges, as systems that we built recently. So they don't ever have to worry about upgrading their system to some other new system because technology has changed. Here's a big one. Here's our latest innovation, molecular hydrogen. Molecular hydrogen is the smallest and most prevalent molecule in the universe. It's what powers stars. It's the next big thing in health supplements, and you've probably never even heard of it before. If you take a look at these antioxidants that are commonly found in the body, coenzyme Q10, vitamin E, catechin, vitamin C, glutathione, these are atomic weights, and compared to the molecular hydrogen. It's a very small molecule. What that means is that it can get into anything. It has the least mass, and it has a neutral charge. Now that allows it to easily penetrate cell walls, blood-brain barrier, even the cell nucleus. And that's where the H2 protects DNA and improves mitochondrial health. Mitochondria are the little energy factories of every cell where energy is produced, but that's also where the free radicals are produced. So molecular hydrogen attacks those free radicals that are formed as a byproduct of the production of energy. And one H2 molecule combines with two hydroxyl or OH negative radicals to produce water with no negative byproducts. Just produces water right in the center of the cell, right where you want it. The other thing we've just discovered is that H2 has selective activation of specific cell signaling pathways to support our body's antioxidant system. What that means is that unlike most antioxidants, it's selective. It doesn't destroy peroxide and other things that we actually need in our body, but right where these hydroxyl radicals are produced that do the damage, that's where it goes and can clean up that damage. So it has a unique modulating effect on the cells, and that includes cell signaling, cell metabolism, healthy gene expression. And the result of those unique effects are you have greater anti-inflammatory, anti-allergic, and anti-obesity and anti-aging effects. Now, this is something that is important to recognize. People have talked a lot about ionizers that are supposed to be able to be the greatest health things, the Kangen system and etc. These things cost $4,000 a piece. And they say that when you drink the water that's alkaline, that's produced by these things, that's why they're such a big deal. That's baloney. It's complete baloney. The kind of alkalinity that these machines are capable of making are that same OH negative ion. It's the definition of pH alkalinity, which measures the difference between H2 and OH negative, H plus I should say, and OH negative ions in the water. Without getting too deep into it, all I want you to know is the kind of alkalinity made by an ionizer is immediately neutralized in your stomach when it combines with stomach acid, turns back into water. It's not capable of alkalinizing your tissues at all. But they do make people feel better. And why does that happen? It's not because of the alkalinity. They didn't know. That's why they came up with this alkalinity and a lot of other goofy ideas like originally it makes water molecules smaller. You can't make a water molecule smaller unless you change the laws of physics. So once that got debunked, then they started telling people, well, it makes clusters of water molecules smaller. That's baloney too. Not until the point of freezing does water show any tendency to cluster, to form crystals. When it's in its liquid state, it doesn't have clusters of water molecules that make any difference. And I can tell you, if you can't digest liquid water, your problems are far worse than a water treatment system is going to be able to fix. But they do make people feel better. Why is this? Those plates, when they're operating, infuse the water with molecular hydrogen. And that's why they have worked. That's why people say, God, I feel better. Now, the problem is you got to pay $4,000 for one of these machines. And the next problem is that these plates, most of the places in the country, the water's hard. And these electrical plates that are inside of these ionizers scale up. And as soon as they scale up, they stop producing molecular hydrogen. There's been over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies on molecular hydrogen, and they demonstrate that it has observable therapeutic effects in over 170 different diseases so far, and that's just in the last 2 or 3 years. It's been shown to benefit every organ of the human body. It effectively mitigates oxidative stress and inflammation. And how many people do you know that suffer from chronic inflammation? Here's a statement by a major research group that was doing this work for the National Institute of Health. You can drink the hydrogen water and it's gone out of the system within an hour. But we've discovered that it has residual therapeutic protective effects that last for hours, days, and in some cases even weeks. One small double-blind randomized study on rheumatoid arthritis found that drinking hydrogen-rich water was very effective in treating the disease. Those with early onset rheumatoid arthritis, before the joints and tissues had too much damage, had complete remission. And during the washout period, no one was taking hydrogen, yet they continued to see improvements in the disease for an additional 4 weeks. One of the big things we now know is that molecular hydrogen effectively prevents liver damage caused by a high sugar diet and metabolic syndrome, which is a major health problem in the United States today. And it has very powerful benefits for those suffering with type 2 diabetes and cancer. As a matter of fact, it appears that molecular hydrogen can reestablish the effectiveness of insulin on tissues. That's a big deal. So there's lots of treatments that hydrogen is used for now. The biggest one probably is inflammation and autoimmune disease, a variety of cardiovascular diseases, radiation problems, neurodegenerative diseases, cancer, infections, metabolic diseases, type 2 diabetes, skin disorders, neuromuscular diseases, and we could go on and on. It is a very valuable medicine. So here's why I began by saying that we're proud of our system. They are the most technologically advanced water treatment systems in the world. They're P231 certified as a water purifier. They offer superior reduction of toxic chemicals, superior reduction of toxic metals, superior reduction of fluoride. We have a system, it's an option, but you can add hydrogen infusion onto the system. No electricity is needed, no wasted water. I should say a continued flow of water, so you can wash vegetables and boil pasta and still have drinking water. And they're very easy to maintain. If you can screw a lid off of a jar, you can maintain one of these things. So I'd encourage you to look into them. I think that you're going to find that they are reliable, they are effective, and probably most importantly is they're affordable. For about $700 to $800, you can get the top of the line machine. Costs about $200 a year for new filters. That's in contrast to a $4,000 Kangen machine that can't even come close to doing what these things do. A Kangen system, ionizers cost way more, but they cannot guarantee disinfected water. They will not remove fluoride out of the water. They can't remove a lot of the chemicals that we talk about out of the water. So this one doesn't, and it's easy to maintain, and it's inexpensive. 10 cents a gallon. Doesn't your family deserve it? So I hope you find this interesting. I hope you, if you have any questions, please contact your representative and ask them. And contact us at our website, www.livingwatersway.com.